Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. This month, we're not fighting technological issues. We are able to actually get on and go live, which is really exciting because I have my good friend Madeline Martin here with me to talk about her fantastic new book that has been just absolutely everywhere. Do you want to tell us a little bit about The Librarian Spy?
Thank you so much. And I'm super glad to be here too. Thank you for having me. So, The Librarian Spy was actually inspired by the librarians during World War II that were sent from America to neutral countries to gather intel, like clandestine newspapers, pamphlets, magazines, all those kind of things, and send them back to America for assessment. And the whole premise of this story is really about well, as you guys know, because you probably read it, a newspaper that comes through with a coded message from France. And Elaine's character was actually based off of a woman who actually existed during the French Resistance, Lucienne Guzniak. And she worked with the printing presses to create these clandestine newspapers, which oftentimes did actually have codes written, either like they could be in the drawings or like in the words or whatever the case may be.
So there's so many different things I want to talk to you about this book because I read it, full confession, back in the spring, like late winter, early spring. I absolutely loved it. And I think I kept messaging with you being like, this is really good. One of the things that I really loved about this book was you have two different heroines with two different experiences, neither of which I've seen as much about in terms of historical fiction recently. So Lisbon was very new to me. I've only seen touches of that, people escaping through the Pyrenees and then ending up in Lisbon before they go off, somewhere else. So I'm curious about how you got into Lisbon, and then also Lyon, which it has a special place in my partner's heart because he spent some time there. So I know we chatted a little bit about that offline as well. So how did you come to these two areas, which I think are so central to why this book has to happen in these places? Setting is really hard to disconnect from this story.
When I first heard about the Librarian Spies, the place that was mentioned was Lisbon, and so I thought, oh, well, that would be kind of interesting. So it was Lisbon, and it was Sweden. And when I started really reading about all of the refugees that were coming into Portugal and sort of like in a hold pattern, waiting to be able to try and go somewhere else that was going to offer more actual safety, that really it was so interesting. And I thought, I haven't really read anything about Lisbon. And so that made me want to research more. And of course, you know how it is with us writers, the more we research, the more we want to write about it.
Of course.
And so that's really that's really where like Lisbon, Portugal, where the idea for that came from. And then for those of you who don't know, I think a lot of people probably do, but I did do travel for this trip. So getting to actually travel to Lisbon and get to go there was just like absolutely incredible. And then with Lyon, and I went to Lyon because your partner gave me all kinds of wonderful places to check out, and which was absolutely fantastic. And it's interesting, with Lyon, it was actually in the Renaissance, it was the capital of the printing, like all of the publication and everything. And so I thought it would be really fascinating and actually Lyon was also the capital of the French Resistance as well. So I'm honestly surprised that there aren't more historical fictions about Lyon, France. And so, I really thought that with like sort of the history with publication and everything, having her working with a printing press would be a really great idea. But sometimes also we go through and we submit ideas to our editors, and our editors are like, not unique enough, or whatever the case may be. So I had submitted at one point in time a story about French resistance like ages ago, and when I was reading through my books for research, I had actually stumbled upon Lucienne Guzniak. And I thought, wow, what an amazing woman. I would love to, use her as inspiration for a character. And so when I came up with the idea in Lisbon, I thought, well, I don't want to just make it all in Lisbon. I would love to sort of have an offset with something that people are more, I think it's like, if I worried that it would be too different and people would be afraid to connect with World War II completely in Portugal, and people are familiar with France and the French Resistance. So I thought that might kind of ground people a little bit more and then ease them into having a new area as well. And so that's really one of the reasons why I did that. But getting to really, utilize that knowledge of Lucienne's life and use her as inspiration for Elaine was something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. So.
So I'm going to give people fair warning here. I think most of you know, but this is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion because you've had a little bit of time to read the book because it came out earlier this summer. So we're going to spoil things. So if that's not for you, put a pin in it, come back once you finish the book because we're going to kind of get into some of the things that happen here. So I want to talk to you about Elaine, who I think is such an interesting character because we meet her at a real crisis in her life that then kicks off this string of events for her. When you were looking at taking inspiration from this real life woman and pouring that into a character that you were creating, what were the things that you were initially drawn to? And then where did you decide to deviate to create Elaine's own story?
So initially, one of the things that really fascinated me was the fact that she gave her identity card to somebody who was Jewish to save her. And I mean, the thing is, for people who aren't familiar with it, your identity card was everything. I mean, if you didn't have your identity card, you could have been arrested and nobody would ever see you again. I mean, it was a really big deal. And also um, all of your ration coupons were all attached to your ID card as well. So if you didn't have an ID card, you couldn't even get your rations. And nobody really had, like, you didn't have like a pantry full of food that'll last you a couple of weeks, so knowing that she had done that, it was just such an incredible thing. And then going on to learn about how she like became an apprentice with this printer, and it was something that women so seldom did because it was usually men who operated these machines. And her story too, she actually was married and her husband worked in a factory. They were fine through the whole war. Like, she was really active in the resistance, he was more passive about it, but they both made it through the war perfectly fine. For me, I really wanted sort of the upheaval of Elaine's husband missing. And at one point also, with Lucienne, she had actually, when the printing press was going, she went to go fix a paper or something. You know how sometimes if you drop something and you just go to grab it, you don't think? Well, it crushed her arm.
Oh
And
my
she was
God.
actually in the hospital for a couple of weeks because of it. And so when the whole thing happened at the very end, where the printing factory was found out, she already had a broken arm still from that. So, but I didn't want to incorporate that because, and I was initially going to, but it kind of made things a little bit too muddy, and there was already so much going on. And so I opted not to do that. But the way that the whole like printing press thing went down was exactly how it happened, where somebody had one of the couriers had been arrested,
Mhm.
and everybody thought that it was that courier, but it wasn't. It was actually somebody else who was on the inside. And with, they couldn't move it though, because you have, like, I mean, the big printing press was like several tons, so it was just kind of like, I guess you just go and hope that nothing happens, and it was so close to the end of the war, they were just kind of trying to press it out for the last couple of weeks. But yeah, so that was kind of, I really did sort of take a general, what happened in her life and kind of stuck with that, but I omitted a couple of details and changed a couple of things to make it more my own.
How about the story of rescue that becomes central to the connection between these two women? And we're going to get to Ava soon here. But where does the idea of the coded pieces in newspapers come from? And how did you settle on that part of the story?
So with the coded messages, they actually did incorporate coded messages, and they were usually a lot more sly about it. They oftentimes did rely on like 15th century French poetry to really get an idea of, like, and it would change every single week as well. And it was something I know, like with SOE agents in the very beginning, a lot of times they also use the poem code as well. So I couldn't find out exactly the exact sort of code that was used in, I mean, sometimes there's so far you can go with your research, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that was one where I definitely hit a brick wall, where I just really couldn't find any more, like, exactly what the type of code that they used was. And so I did sort of like a take on the poem code that was used by SOE agents, sort of combined with like the 15th century French poetry sort of foundation for that. Yeah.
And one of the things that struck me was the way that communication not only got out from this printing press, but also came back in again. And this is the conversation that happens with the radio broadcasts as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. So you have Radio Londres, which was basically Radio London, and that would air every single day at the same time. And initially it would say, like, we have these important messages. And it was these crazy things like grandmother has a long mustache and, the rabbits have carrots and, like all these kind of crazy things. And every now and then they'd throw in these really crazy ones too, to just that didn't mean anything. It was really just to throw off whoever might be trying to decode their messages. And then afterwards, they would talk about all of the current events in the news. And this was a lot of the news that was used to sort of, build these newspapers, a lot of, like countering the spread of disinformation for the Nazis and also giving hope a lot of times to people in France. And so, with a lot of those coded messages, you could have information that was transferred over, like, for example, right before D-Day happened, that was all the code that I used in there was exact to what was said right before D-Day happened.
So that part is documented for something as big as D-Day, but I imagine there are other things where you have to be the one who creates it. You have to be the one who makes up your own code, if you will.
Yes. And, I was actually going to like kind of break it down how she would understand it and everything. But then when I started doing that, sometimes things get too complicated. And so it really was just so much easier to be like, only these two guys really know how to translate it. Because I also figured not everybody would know.
Yes.
So yeah, I was like, they know how to do it. She doesn't. It's good.
Well, it's interesting you say not everybody would know, because so much of this world is based on deception, only allowing people who you truly, truly trust or who have a reason to not betray you
Right.
confidences, because it is so easy for one little slip up or one arrest to really change everybody's fates. And you see that in the course of this book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would love to talk about how you built tension in Lyon, where the danger is very present and very obvious. We know what it is that they are trying to do. They're trying to evade being caught and stopped and arrested and possibly killed. Lisbon was interesting because that's a different type of tension and a different type of danger, and one that maybe takes on a very interesting form, I think, especially in Ava's case. She doesn't realize when she gets there, I think, what she's getting herself into. So would you sort of refresh our memories a little bit about her side of the story as well?
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of times these librarian spies, they really weren't given any sort of instruction or preparation. They were just sort of thrown to the proverbial wolves, as it were. And with Ian Fleming's 007, his Casino Royale actually was based off of his time in Lisbon. So that will give you a really good idea about like how all these spies were like such consummate spies, and these poor librarians were sort of haplessly thrown in and not really knowing exactly what they were doing. So, I think that's like really important to keep in mind with her as well. And I'm sorry, I forgot the other part of the question.
And sort of when she's dropped in, as an author, you're building tension in a different way, and you're kind of pulling back a little bit of the curtain on a very shadowy world where the danger isn't necessarily as upfront and as
Right.
present. So what were the things that you really wanted to do to make that very clear to the reader that this is not a holiday?
Thank you. Sorry, I knew there was another part I'd forgotten. You're so good. Thank you. So, initially, right where she has Lucas, who she meets, and he kind of like hits on her. And, the interesting thing is this actually happened in Lisbon, where they would have Nazi soldiers who would pretend to be Austrian men, and they would woo American women to try to get secrets out of them. And so I thought, when I read that in my research, I thought, oh, I have to like have this happen. And so that really is how the introduction of Lucas comes into play with this. So even though Portugal was neutral, you still had both sides who were sort of fighting underground a little bit, like you weren't like, you didn't just have like Nazis and Americans holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I mean, they really were kind of taking little, it's like when mom's back is turned and they're taking snipes at each other, behind the back. That's kind of how this was. So, you did still have a lot of subterfuge. You did still have a lot of just conspiracy and everything else going on. Spreading disinformation was really huge in Lisbon. So, it was one of those things that if you wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it, you only told one person kind of thing, because you wanted to make sure that it spread to the right places.
Yeah.
So that was how a lot of it was amped up as far as the tension goes. But you also had the PVDE, and the PVDE are the Portuguese Special Police, and with them, I mean, even the refugees had to check in once a month to make sure that they were, had all of their correct paperwork and everything. And if anything expired, they ran the risk of being arrested. And of course, you also had other people who, if they were doing what they weren't supposed to be doing, they were going to be arrested as well. And the prisons there were hardcore. Apparently, the Gestapo actually trained the PVDE. So when we went and we did, and I actually haven't posted this on social media yet, but it's in the pipeline. But they actually had a pain chart, which was like a picture of a person and showed all the weakest points that hurt the most that you could torture to elicit the most pain. So they were really, really, really just brutal. And so that was also scary because a lot of times people who were arrested, you never saw them again.
Right.
Yeah.
It was interesting while reading those parts of the book. Casablanca is one of my favorite movies, and obviously set in a very different place, in a supposedly neutral place. But Lisbon felt like it had some of the overtones of that, where, it could all be very pleasant, and, parties and, beautiful food and all of these things at one moment. And then, as you say, somebody could disappear and you could never hear from them again, or the secret police could come in and everybody's tone just changed. And it was so interesting because that is, again, a very different flavor of historical fiction than I've seen a lot of World War II fiction focus on. Was it difficult researching something that was a little bit less documented in
Oh my gosh,
genre
yeah.
that you're writing in?
It
Yeah,
was so
I thought that
hard.
was great.
Oh my gosh. So first of all, there's like two nonfiction books, and I'm used to having like dozens and dozens and dozens.
Because I don't know if people know this, but you are a real hardcore research before you start to writer. I mean, we
Yeah.
were talking offline and you mentioned that you have like 150 books on a subject for your next book, which is impressive.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I dig really deep into research. I really try to make as much of the book like I said, like even with Lucas pretending to be an Austrian, like that was completely founded in history. And so I really do try hard to build a foundation that is strictly based on actual history. And it was so hard to find anything on Portugal. I was able to find sort of like random things. I like to refer to myself sort of as a bibliography rat. I'll just kind of scope out the bibliography and be like, all right, what you got for me? And then I start hunting for all of those books. And, a lot of times they're out of print, which is really heartbreaking because it seems like so many books that have so much, like just a wealth of knowledge, aren't even in publication anymore. So I always tell my family if I meet an untimely demise to make sure that my books go to a university or somewhere. I'm like, please don't just throw these books away. I'm like, oh, this old thing. No, please. It's probably out of print. Make sure somebody has it.
It takes a lot to find that book.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so, I was able to find a couple of books that way. And then obviously going to Lisbon was huge because I could talk to people. My tour guide was really amazing. Her grandmother was 101 years old, and she actually remembered when all of the refugees were coming into Lisbon. And so she was sharing information about that, which I mean was so wonderful to me to get to have that information. And it was neat because it kind of opened that topic of conversation between my tour guide and her grandmother as well. And another thing that I learned doing this, and it's been really helpful even with my book that I'm working on now in Poland, is I downloaded this amazing translation software, which is sort of like an amped up Google Translate. And I will ask a question in English and it will translate it to Portuguese. And then I would put the Portuguese into my search engine and it would give me all of my results back. And sometimes you can actually hit translate this page on and it'll translate it for you. And if it doesn't, if it's like, a PDF, I've noticed a lot of international sites will have PDFs that will come up instead, which is kind of nice because then you don't have to download anything on your computer. Then you can highlight it and you can copy it and you can paste it into your translator and it will translate the text for you. And that was really, really huge for helping to find more information because in the native tongue, there's a lot more information than has been translated into English.
Sure. Yeah, I imagine that's a particularly challenging thing to approach as an author who I don't know how good your Portuguese is. Mine is very minimal. I can order
Yeah,
maybe
no.
order a glass of wine at this point, but that's about it.
Yeah,
Um,
mine's pretty bad.
so it opens up a whole different set of worlds that you can explore as an author, and I imagine that's really exciting.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I want to highlight a comment from Kelly here, who says, I loved Anna, inexperienced and sort of socially awkward at the beginning, but really comes into her own and finds her inner courage in Lisbon. Why did you have her go through why did you have Ava go through the character journey that you had her go through in this book? What was it that you felt she needed to achieve by the end of this book in order to kind of come out a different person?
So I actually picked a lot of librarians' brains for putting Ava together because I didn't want to go with like the cliche sort of version of a librarian. And a lot of what I really understood about librarians is that they are really they love the knowledge that they have. They feel the best when they are in a place where they know the answer to everything. And that's not like to be like a Miss Know-It-All kind of thing. That's like a secure in their knowledge of what they've gleaned from their surroundings, especially in a situation where you are in a library and you're almost seen as like sort of a resident go-to for whatever information people need. So having her go from this, comfortable world where she's really built a life for herself and be sent to a place where she knows nothing about what's going on, for her that was incredibly jarring. And I wanted her to get to the point where she could realize that she doesn't have to stay in her little knowledge nest, that she can go out and she can explore the world and she can glean so much more knowledge because of that. And that was really part of my idea for her character growth, even with the whole fear of flying and everything, sort of at the very end coming to terms with that and realizing being afraid of flying for her, and in my head, and I'm not, if anybody's afraid of flying, don't worry, I am too. So this is, I'm not saying anything negative about you or anything, but in her world as it was originally lived, the fear of flying was such a huge thing. And once she lived, she realized how much her fear of flying was such a small thing. And so it really sort of correlated into her whole character arc.
I think that's such an interesting approach, and I love seeing how people build because in almost every book that I've read and enjoyed, I can tell you that the characters go on some sort of journey. There's some sort of growth, there's some sort of understanding or realization that happens over the course of the pages that brings you along as a reader. And I think that's where a lot of reader empathy comes from, because often we can relate to what those people were going through, even if it's a world away from what we know. And I think it's really interesting with historical fiction in particular, because not only is it often in places that we don't live or we're not from, we're also looking at times that we can't experience because we live in the here and now. And it's such an interesting way to experience history. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things about writing it and reading it.
I completely agree. You said that perfectly.
Well, thank you. What about Elaine's story and Elaine's arc? What was it that you wanted to really show people through her side of the story?
With Elaine's character, I really, in my head, and a lot of, so when I build my characters, I really try to take the pulse of the mood of the culture. And with looking back on, with like in France, for example, there was so much gosh, there was so many horrible things going on, like first with like the persecution of the Jews, and then like everybody being taken away, and you don't know what happened to friends and loved ones. And then after that, then like they're all starving. And I mean, it's such a horrible situation. And so for me, Elaine's character, she started off with so much anger, and she was such an impulsive character to begin with. That was just her nature. But she also just had this rage. She had this rage against the Nazis, and she had this rage against Joseph, who she thought was trying to keep her from doing something that she felt was right to do. And so I had her act impulsively with him. And as the journey really went on for her, excuse me, it was really the understanding that you can't act impulsively, that you do have to consider other people's feelings. It really was almost sort of building empathy in her and taking that moment to step back. Like, for example, when she does find out that Joseph is dead, and she's talking to Etienne about it, And her knee-jerk response is to lay the blame at his feet. And she realizes in that exact moment, I can't do that. You
Yeah.
know, I've already done something like this before and it was damaging. And realizing that she has to like offer some sort of empathy toward him, you know, despite what's happened, or have or feel empathy for him despite what's happened, even though she does have this rage. And so a lot of it is just almost sort of like her processing just the enormity of everything that's gone on, and in the end sort of finding her place in this broken world.
It's so interesting, two very different characters, but two very distinct and in some ways very complementary paths that they take. And I want to highlight a comment from Jenna who says, I love that both stories could both be standalone novels, yet they tied together perfectly. Because
Oh,
you
thank
see
you.
everybody on opposite sides of the page for so long. It's so satisfying when the stories finally cross and you realize, oh, this is what we were aiming for. This is what we were looking for, is where these paths are going to converge. How do you judge where and when that happens? Because I imagine you don't want it to happen too soon, and you don't
Right.
want it to happen too far in the story that you're losing all of the punch when
Right.
that happen.
Well, and this one was really complicated because, you know, for me, I've got the history in my bones, and I just really have a hard time deviating from the actual like factual history. And so they wouldn't have met during the war. I read my reviews, and I know some people were a little bit disappointed about that. And I'll take the knock. I mean, because it was
Sure.
historically accurate. There was no way that somebody in Lisbon was going to be meeting somebody in France while the war was on. It just literally would not have happened, especially not with the roles that they were playing. And so, you know, for me, that's why I knew that they were going to meet at the end. But for me, it was also really important that I tied their character arcs kind of together, or not even their character arcs, but their journeys. So, you know, I didn't want to make it so obvious, like, oh, she gets a new pair of shoes, she gets a new pair of shoes, she gets a new lipstick, she gets a new lipstick. But, you know, I did do it where they both were on a journey where they were starting this sort of new adventure and an opportunity to really do an effort in the war and make a difference. They both had somebody who they loved, who they were trying to fight for. They both had, you know, their fault, like their setbacks with these roles that they had taken on, and these difficulties that they both encountered, and how they both dealt with it at that same time. So you did have a lot of actual side by side comparison. If you take, like, if you look at the whole thing and you really break it down, and that was completely intentional because I knew it was going to be a long time before they had a chance to meet.
Yeah, you have to understand sort of if they're not crossing paths on the page early in the book or even in the middle of the book, what is it? Why are we looking at both of these women? What is it that sort of you could, as a reader, draw from both of them and understand why these stories are compatible with each other?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got a lot of great comments and questions, so I'm going to rattle through a few of these. But just talking about character, Susan says, I think Ava is my favorite character. She was so content staying in her comfort zone, especially considering the family challenges she had experienced. She was extremely courageous to rise to the demands of doing what was asked of her to help the war effort. I'm not sure I would have been able to overcome my fears the way that she did.
Thank you.
It's really interesting, the idea of, being courageous and overcoming fears and things like that, because in a way, both of these women are ordinary women, right? There's no big title or money or
Right.
something that makes them stand out from the crowd. Nobody's a movie star, nothing like that. These are just very ordinary people's stories, but their stories are really incredible. Do you find yourself drawn to writing about those ordinary women, or do you think there may be a point in your career where you go, you know what, I'm going to write about a movie star, a princess, of whatever it is?
Well, I never say I won't write about something because you never know.
Very
But
true.
yeah, because but I will say I am so fascinated by ordinary people in history. And I always have been. Like, you know, even when I was writing romance, for example, when I would research the medieval days, it wasn't the kings and queens that I wanted to learn about. It was the peasants. Like, I wanted to learn, what did they eat? What did they do for a living? You know, what did they do for fun? What did they wear? You know, all these things that I feel like there's so much documentation around people who are rich and famous. And I feel like a lot of times it really is inadequate when you go and try and find the research on just sort of ordinary normal people. And for me, that's what interests me the most. Maybe it's a challenge. I don't know what it is. My research brain is like, challenge accepted. But it's so fascinating to get to learn about that. And I feel like a lot of women who are working with the war are very much unsung heroes. Especially in France, a lot of the women, when you read through the firsthand accounts, they say, "Oh, I just did what I had to do." Like it's not, but meanwhile, you have all of these like Frenchmen who are publishing all of these, stories of their grandiose efforts in the war, which I mean, and not to take anything away from them, because they have been some amazing feats, to be sure. So, and in the end, they were all doing something to help people. And but as far as women, a lot of times it was like, oh, I made dinner, I ran this over to the courier, I saved this person, and then I picked up my kids from school, all in a day's work.
All while dealing with impossible rationing during, especially in well, depending on which part of France you were in, especially during the occupation. As you've said, people disappearing, not knowing how you can get information out to family, because postcards were very, very restrictive, right? The post was very restrictive. So any sort of communication, train travel, I mean, it must have been incredibly difficult to just live a normal life.
Yeah. And there was no, like, if you sent something, you never knew if it got delivered, if it didn't get delivered. Like, there was no tracking system. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, we have, not surprisingly, a lot of questions about research because we've touched on it already, but I think people really respond, especially in your books, to the level of detail and the attention to getting it historically right. So Judith, I thought this was a lovely comment. Judith left a comment saying, I finished listening to it yesterday and it was an enjoyable book experience. In addition to well-written plot and interesting characters, there were many tidbits about World War II information that are not often found in novels. Details like the reference to Elizabeth Arden's Victory Red lipstick, which I love, enriched the story. I know you said you read a lot and you start with the books, but where do you go to mine those little itty bitty details? And because this is not your first World War II book, has it gotten easier?
Honestly, I just really find them in a lot of the nonfiction books that I read. Most of the nonfiction books that I read, I found incorporate firsthand experiences in there as well, where people are sharing part of their story. And a lot of times people share really interesting little details in their stories, and I write every single one of those down. And so it's not even like I go out and I try to hunt for it. It's that I rather stumble upon it and I pick up that little pebble and I tuck it in my pocket until I have a whole pocket full of pebbles and I'm like rattling through my story and sprinkling them. So there's that fun little visual for you.
I like it. Do you have a system that sort of works for you in terms of noting these things down and keeping track of them? Because you must be, especially given how long it takes to write a book, and then also how long it takes to get to like the copy editing process where people query things and ask you, are you sure that's right? And you have to go back and be like, okay, when was that invented? Or was that actually what was used? And is there a system that you have for yourself that works right now? Or are you sort of trying to find one?
Well, I have a system. I don't know that it works so well, but I pretty much write everything in notebooks. I handwrite pretty much everything, which is a lot, I know, but for me, it stays in my brain better. And the crazy thing is, like, when I'm reading through, and I really do prefer to do a lot more like actual books than like online, because I will remember, if I'm like reading through something and it's like asking about one particular, like, oh, how did you know what coupon this was? Or are you sure this was the right coupon of the shoe? I know exactly which book I found it in. And I can usually find about the page where it was located or what was written around it, because I do pay attention to everything, like while I'm like taking my hand notes. What is not working for me is the fact that I run out of notebook space. And so now I have like 20 notebooks, and then I'm like, oh, which notebook was it in? Because sometimes I can't find the notebook that I'm working in. So I'm like, oh, I'll just be like, oh, continue on this page. And I don't know why I hate myself, but I am my own worst enemy.
It feels like not a big deal at the time. And then you sit down 4 or 5, 6, 8 months later and you go, I know it's there. If I had the book in front of me, I could probably tell you which page it appears on, what part of the page. But when it comes to the notebook, it's like, who knows?
It's horrible. And I will say one thing I finally did that did help myself is I organized my library. So I have this bookshelf, I have those bookshelves, and then I also have a bunch of bookshelves in my living room as well. And I actually went through and I organized them by location and time period. And
That's
oh, thank you, past Madeline, because it is so much helpful. Like it's so much more helpful trying to find a book and be like, no, that's France, that's Portugal, that's Poland, that's England, that's America. And you're looking for just that one book in like a sea of like 1,000.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So at least organizing my library was a significant improvement from what it was previously.
I don't know if you can see behind here, but this is obviously not organized because there's a whole bunch of one color, because those are all my author copies. Need to get moved into the office, but we've moved. And so there's fiction, nonfiction, gardening books, my copy, like everything is just scattered right now. So I'm just wandering around the house, like looking for books. About half the time I'm trying to write, it's not working for me. So
once you get organized, it will be so much easier. Because I was totally in that boat forever. And I was like, I literally just took a weekend one day and I piled, like literally there are piles of books everywhere. I looked like Mr. Evans' bookshop back from the last bookshop in London. It's so bad. But I finally got them all organized and now it's like,
breathe again.
yes.
Yeah. Very familiar with the feeling. So getting organized. Speaking about Mr. Evans' bookshop, we have what I think is a great question from Susan. She says, how do you come up with the ideas for your most recent World War II novels? The Last Bookshop in London and The Librarian Spy are so different yet equally riveting, and I love how the theme of books bringing people together during challenging times is common on both sides. So what is it about books that makes you want to write a book about books?
I don't even know that I well, I guess like with The Last Bookshop in London, like I did intend to write a book about books. But like for me, I feel like every aspect of my life, books are involved in it because I am a reader. And it's been like that. It was like that even before I became an author. How many times you're outside and something happens and you're like, oh, that happened in a book one time. Or, it's like, or you remember a quote from a book, like because of something that you've seen or something that you've heard or something that you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that like, that's sort of just the heart of a reader. And my characters are readers because I really think that, that's something that I enjoy writing about. Like, so for example, like with Elaine, even though she really worked with the power of the written word, she wasn't necessarily a reader per se. She didn't have that same affinity for, reading. And she was her own unique character because of that. And then obviously, with Ava, she would definitely have a heart of a reader because she was definitely a reader. But yeah, all my books will all be different because just different settings and just different people and who those settings, end up creating the characters to become who they are.
I wanted to also ask you about travel. You've inspired a research trip. I haven't told you this yet. You've inspired a research trip I'm taking in September. My first time getting to actually go forth and do a proper dedicated research trip, because I saw all your photos from Lisbon and I saw your photos from Lyon. I was insanely jealous. So what is it about researching on the ground that you find so helpful for writing?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited for you and I cannot wait to see all the pictures. Congratulations.
This is the great thing, is you get to go along with the author as they do the research.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I feel like is really so important about being able to travel, like if one has the ability to, traveling is not always possible. But it's really just getting to experience the place from that character's perspective. And so for example, like when I was in France and Portugal, I would walk like 25,000 steps a day because I wanted the layout in my head. And so like, I know that, Rue de Plat turns into Rue de Sola. And I knew in my head because I could see it while my character was walking it. You also obviously have the opportunity to taste all the food and like see all the beautiful sights and think like, what would your character who sees this view every single day think about this? Would you really see it? Would you ever look up it and think about like what this means? For example, like, the Basilica in Lyon, that was so huge because because Mary, she was called Our Lady of Lyon because she had saved people back during the plague, and they looked to her for a source of comfort up on this hill. So, you know, these are the parts of like getting to go there and like imagining being your character and looking up and seeing that. And then also, like, for example, when I went to Lisbon, you had the Calcata, I think that's how it's pronounced. And that's sort of the limestone and basalt mosaics with all of the stonework on the ground, which are beautiful. Everywhere you go, it's completely different, which you may not know if you were just looking at pictures. But what you definitely wouldn't know by looking at pictures is how slippery it is because it's been worn down by, you know, decades, if not hundreds of years of people walking on it. And I'm a Rothy's girl. And while they're super cute and comfortable, they have like no traction. So going uphill, they're really slippery. And especially if they're wet, they are slick. And they're also like over time, they've settled unevenly. So it's like walking on like a frozen sea of stone, and you would never know that just looking at pictures. And so it's having those sort of firsthand experiences and like getting to go and see Fado. Oh my gosh, that was just such a like a soul fulfilling experience to get to go and do. And if you listen to the music online, it's just not the same. So it just really it like fills in the colors for everything.
You made me very jealous because I didn't get to go see Fado when I went to Lisbon. I went on a
You
short
need to go back.
I know. I went on a short trip in 2018, but the thing that made me laugh was all the times that people are slipping and sliding down the roads, all the times that people are walking uphill, because it doesn't matter which way you try to go in Lisbon, you're always walking uphill. And I very much found that to be the case. But it's a city that is so interesting because it is so visceral going, and it's unlike anywhere else between, you know, the trams and all the things that you think of with, you know, the tiled roofs and, you know, the vistas out to the sea. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. The food is excellent.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
loved how much it felt like being there while reading the book. And that made me
Oh,
really,
thank
really
you.
happy.
Thank you.
Now I need to go to Lyon as well, because you've also described Lyon in such wonderful detail too. So
Thank you. It's so cool getting to see the triples. I was like, so that was like the highlight of the trip for me for that.
I can completely understand why. Yeah.
Oh, that and the Resistance Museum, because when I went to the Resistance Museum, they had a whole room that was set up to look like an underground printing press. And they had the actual Minerva there, the printing press that Lucien Wozniak actually used during World War II to print Combat, which I thought was like amazing. And I took like 100 pictures because I was so excited. But you know, when you don't use a flash, they came out all blurry except one.
Well, I was going to say, you know, people, we should plug your social media right now, because you've been putting these photos out as not only as you were doing the traveling, but now as well.
Right. Yeah. So you can find my on my social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter as at Madeline M. Martin, because somebody else told Madeline Martin before I got to it. And then on Facebook, I think I'm like Madeline Martin author or something like that. If you type in Madeline Martin author, I'm sure I'll pop up. And then my website is madelinemartin.com. And I also actually did hashtags for my trips. So you can do hashtag MM in Lyon, Lyon, or MM in Lisbon, or MM in Warsaw for my new one that's coming up.
And that will pull up all those photos grouped together, which is perfect. That's the way to do it, I think. So we have a couple of out of left field questions, which I always so Debbie, well, no, let's hold on that one, Debbie. Sorry, we're gonna do one first here because I've lost it. Oh, here we go. Christine asks, does your family read your books?
So my husband listens to all of my books. In fact, you know, when we first had started dating, that's so awesome.
You're both big audio book listeners, right?
Yes, we are. And so, you know, it's cute because when he and I first, like when we first moved in together, like a million years ago, I came upstairs and he was cleaning the bathroom and listening to one of my romances on audio. It was like, oh, it's so wonderful. You're like, so yeah, so he listens to my books, and then my oldest daughter read The Last Bookshop in London, and then I think she's in the process of reading The Librarian Spy. And my youngest hasn't yet. She's not a super big reader. So.
Well, at some point, you know, it comes comes to everybody at different times, I think.
Exactly.
And you've done some of your research trips with family members, right? I think your mom came on one of the trips. Is that right?
Yes. So when I went to Lyon, my oldest daughter came with me, and then when I went to Lisbon, my husband came with me, and then when my mom found out I was going to Poland, she said dibs. So she came with me, and it's fun because she always does. She always reads through all my books before they finally get to publication, and so for her, like getting to go on a research trip with me, I think it was probably a lot more than she was realizing that she was going to be getting, because we spent hours. But she was such a trooper. Like we would do. I mean, again, we walk like 20 to 25,000 steps a day. We went back to the Resistance Museum, or the Uprising Museum, 3 different days. So I mean, hours and hours and hours of me just like furiously. I'm the kind of person at a museum that the security guard starts kind of shadowing. Who is a suspicious character who's been here for 8 hours? That's me. Shameless.
They're like, oh, okay, I understand.
But yeah, she was like a trooper the whole time. And it's so great because I know that when she goes back and she reads through this book that I'm writing right now, she's going to remember all of the research that she's done with me and getting to really see it in application in the book, which is just going to be really cool.
Oh, I think that will be a really wonderful, I imagine very new experience.
Yes, definitely. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Susan asks, did you always know that you wanted to be an author? And also, what books and authors inspired you growing up?
So I always thought it would be super cool to be an author, but for me, thinking about being an author was like thinking about growing up and being a princess or something. Like it felt like really unattainable, because I don't know, like it just did. And the fact that I actually am an author now, it's like a pinch me, I'm real kind of like, is this real life kind of thing, because it just is such an amazing dream come true. And as far as what authors inspired me growing up, I was a huge fan of Laura Ingalls Wilder. That was my favorite series to read. In fact, when we lived in Germany, the second time, we had this beautiful backyard because we had to live on the economy because there wasn't any military housing yet. And there was this beautiful backyard, and I ran around. I was Laura. And my mom bought me a calico print dress and a bonnet. And I, with my little bonnet and bare feet, all over the place. Like I was Laura every single summer. It was amazing.
I have some very distinct memories of reading those books growing up, the paperbacks, when I was
Yes.
up, and I loved those stories as well. They were some
They were so good.
Yeah, really a lot of fun.
Yes.
Now I think it's time for your question here, Debbie. I want to make sure I get it right. Let's see. You guys have so many questions. I'm losing things here. My apologies. Yes. Okay. Debbie wants to know, what are you researching right now and what's the inspiration? So this I think is a good way to get into a little bit what you can tell us about the next book. I know that it's always tricky and it's still in progress.
Yeah, so even though it's in progress, apparently it's actually up for pre-order already on Amazon. No pressure. So yeah, but it's called The Keeper of Hidden Books. Although initially I was kind of worrying between The Keepers of Hidden Books or The Keeper of Hidden Books. So you might find it under both titles. You can go to my website and you'll see it there under books. But it takes place in Warsaw, Poland, obviously during World War II. And it's about two best friends, one of whom is Jewish and ends up being forced into the ghetto, and the other one is on the Polish side. And it has a lot to do with like the Home Army and the Polish Home Army and all of the underground. There's so much information going on about that. Poland had the most unified resistance group of all of Europe. And it's really fascinating doing all the research and everything. So I can't get too much into it, but there's going to be some stuff in there about libraries as well. I'm just saying.
It's funny, whenever people ask that question, you're still writing the book, even if you're still in the sort of developmental edit stage, there's so much that can change. And I know I've talked about books, I maybe talk too much because entire plot lines have gone by the wayside by the time the
I know. I mean, even like when I look at what the Publishers Marketplace announcement had said, I'm like, ooh, it's like, and that was what, 25 words?
Yeah. Yeah.
And even it's changed so much even since then. So yeah.
No,
So
it's
it's
funny.
about Warsaw, Poland.
Yeah, that's all you
World
need to
War
know. And the final title is.
So I think it's going to be the Keeper of Hidden Books, but it was briefly changed to the Keepers of Hidden Books. So you can find it either plural or singular. But if you go to my website, madelinemartin.com, under books, you'll see it up there with no cover. And you can click on that and it has links to the places that are available for pre-order and and on Goodreads, I'm actually putting little notes, letting people know what's going on with where it's at.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, the title thing is another thing that is always, it's fluid until it gets printed on a cover. Don't worry about
Yes,
it.
yes, I know. Actually, it's funny with The Librarian Spy, if anybody saw it, originally written as The American Librarian, it went back and forth, oh my gosh, like a half a dozen times. So, I really had wanted to be The American Librarian, but obviously I didn't win.
No, I have never won in terms of the title battle. So at this point, I'm just like, is it a good title? Do we like it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's do
Well,
it.
and that's the funny, it really is funny because I think a lot of people don't realize that authors really have no control over the title or the cover. Like, we have control over the content inside of it, but the external, literally no control. Like, our name gets on there, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, it's a totally different process, and it's much more collaborative than I think a lot of people realize, because there's a whole team behind
Yes.
traditionally published books. So books that come out from publishers that you've probably heard of, and that means that there's art departments and marketing departments and sales and all sorts of people, and everybody has a different area of expertise. So I always laugh when people ask if I have any say in designing my covers, because you don't want me anywhere near the cover. I have no idea how to represent a 100,000 word book on a book cover. So
Yeah, it's even hard when people ask you like, "Oh, what's your book about?" And you're like, "Oh, I just wrote this 100,000 word book, but I'm having a hard time coming up with like a dozen words to tell you."
thanks. You
It's so
like
hard.
yourself. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's very true. It is. Well, I want to make sure to ask you before we go, if you have anything that you've been reading recently that you would like to recommend, new, old, whatever it is.
So this one is a new and upcoming, and it's Renee Rosen's Glamour. Oh my gosh, I literally keep forgetting. So it's Glamour Girl of Fifth Avenue. And if you've seen the cover, it's gorgeous. It's like this beautiful 1940s fashion plate with like a black and white background and a blue dress. And I'm sure if I'm telling you that and you've seen the cover, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's actually about Estee Lauder's life, but it's told from the perspective of a best friend of hers. And it is so good. I mean, I've just been completely sucked into this book, and it's just so beautifully written. And the details are just, history fan here. So many wonderful details. I feel like the verbiage that's used, detailing like the makeup, even the food they eat, the drinks, everything. It's just so historically on point, and it's just so well done. So if you haven't pre-ordered it yet, I highly recommend that you pre-order it because it's amazing.
I am going to do that myself, because I have to admit I have slept on Renee Rosen so far, and I have been meaning to read her books for a while now. So I need to make sure that gets bumped up to the top of my pile.
Oh yeah, it is really, really well done. And I haven't had a chance to read Renee Rosen yet either. This is my first book by her, but after I finish this one, I think I'll be listening to the rest of them, because she really is she is a really, really amazing author. I'm loving it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I always love a new to me recommendation. That's always fun, because we end up, I'm sure we end up reading some of the same books because of, blurbs or just general interest in the genre, and
Right.
finding somebody that's new and different for you is always a lot of fun.
Definitely.
Well, let's make sure that we give you another chance to plug where people can find you online, where they can follow these, fantastic pictures that you've been tweeting and or posting on Facebook and Instagram. So where can people look up your social media and your website?
So Instagram and Facebook are going to be Instagram and Twitter are going to be at Madeline M. Martin. And then Facebook is Madeline Martin Author. And then just my website is madelinemartin.com. Also, my newsletter, you can sign up for my newsletter on my on my website. And with my newsletter, I send that out once a month, but I also do include what I'm reading, and I also include a little historical tidbit there as well. So, but on all my social media accounts, I try to share historical detail. It's a little harder on Twitter because you only have so many characters.
Yes.
But usually I do try to share things on Instagram and Facebook, as well as a lot of amazing books that I'm reading and excited to share about too. So.
Well, I highly recommend the newsletter in particular. You have a very, very good newsletter, and
Oh, thank you.
my assistant and I kind of always take a peek at what's in your newsletter whenever it comes out. So,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
absolutely, absolutely.
That's like the true mark of honor is like when another author like wants to take the time to read another person's newsletter. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I know people are just absolutely loving this book, and rightly so. It's really fantastic. And it's so fun to read something that is so set in a place that's so different and tells a different story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much again for having me here. It's always so fun chatting with you.
Absolutely. Well, next month I can do a little preview because I actually know what's going on next month. So next month we have a special guest, not an author, but a literary agent. Emily Sylvan Kim, who is my agent, is going to come on, and you're going to get to have a bit of a gossipy conversation about what goes on behind the scenes in publishing. So get your questions ready. There will be plenty to preview and things like that in the group. But we will we'll be talking to Emily and kind of getting into a bit of what is involved with publishing. And I realize actually, as I'm saying that will be almost to the day Emily and my 10-year anniversary together.
Oh, wow. That's so awesome.
Makes me feel very, very publishing old, but in a good way.
You've been publishing since we were 13?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be chatting all about that. So get your questions ready if you've ever wanted to talk to an agent about sort of what goes on behind the scenes, or even what an agent does. It's a bit of a mysterious world if you're not deep in the heart of publishing. So that will be to look forward to in September, and then we'll be back to regularly scheduled book chat. So thank you guys again so much. Thank you again for joining us, Madeline. This has just been so much fun, and I really appreciate
thank you.
And we'll see you guys next month.